Hey guys, welcome to Digit.in, and today we're reviewing a laptop that you've been asking us to look at for quite some time now. This is the AMD Ryzen powered Omen 15. But before we get into all of the specs and how this machine performs, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel and also hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any future updates from us. Now that we have the essentials out of the way, let's begin. First, let's go over the specs of the machine that we've reviewed. This particular Omen 15 is powered by the AMD Ryzen 7 4800H processor. It's got an Nvidia GTX 1650 Ti on board. It has a full HD 1080p panel with a refresh rate of 60 Hz and of course just 8 gigs of RAM, which is of course upgradable, and a 512 GB NVMe storage drive. Whew. All in all, it's a fairly impressive specification set. In addition to that, you also get a full-size USB port on one side, Ethernet jack, HDMI port, headphone jack, and on the other side you have more USB 3.0 ports, two of them that is, and a USB Type-C connector as well. So all in all, this is pretty much the same machine in terms of its ports situation compared to the Omen 15 that we've already reviewed earlier, the Intel variant, but there are some things about this machine that are just different. So let's take a look at that. First up, let's talk gaming. Now, gaming on this machine is of course a given that it's going to be a great experience. But exactly where does it fall in the gamut of things? Well, here's a disclaimer first. This is a 60 Hz panel. This panel cannot go over a refresh rate of 60 Hz. So we don't really expect to game at higher FPS than 60. So as long as we're getting 60 FPS, I'm going to say that this is actually, doing the job well. Coming together to achieve that is the entire specification set. You've got your RAM, you've got your fast NVMe drive, this 8-core processor, the Ryzen 7 4800H, and of course also the Nvidia GTX 1650 Ti. Now all of that comes together to deliver some very impressive numbers. For example, in games like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which are actually quite demanding, we managed to see an average frame rate, and this is an average with the graphic setting set to high default and then medium. So at high we managed to get 56 FPS, and medium graphic settings we managed to get 61 FPS. Now if you were to tweak these graphic settings based on personal preference, you could maybe turn off certain things, turn on certain things. You could of course have the number vary a little bit. What also helps in making sure that you're getting the most out of the performance is making sure that your fans are set to operate at max, but we'll cover that in a bit. In a game like Forza Horizon 4, we actually again see very impressive frame rate numbers, and if you're curious about how it performs in the other tests, you can see all of the numbers on your screen right now. Overall, there's actually nothing to be disappointed about, especially 87 FPS in Forza is pretty impressive. It's a fast-paced game, and if you can manage to get that, then you're looking at a winner. So overall, for gaming, this machine is surprisingly good. Where it falls short, however, is in creative tasks. Now, this is I'm going to talk about the creative stuff in also accordance with the display quality. Now, I've used an X-Rite i1 Display Pro to sort of measure the color capabilities of this display, the brightness it can achieve, what kind of color gamut it can cover in totality, and it's not looking very good. Here's why. So first off, in terms of your display, it has a peak brightness of just a little under 130 nits. That's very low. However, thankfully, the panel uniformity on this is pretty good. The panel retains at 100%, 75 and 50% brightness. It maintains a fairly uniform brightness across the display. Unfortunately, it can only represent 60% of the sRGB color space, which means you're not going to be able to see the entire 16.7 million colors that are incorporated in the sRGB color space. And what you see on screen is essentially a very dull representation. So it's not as saturated. The display feels a little on the duller side, and that's because it can only cover, unfortunately, 60% of the sRGB color space. But the good thing is, even that 60% that it is able to reproduce, it does so accurately. So the delta E levels are in the 1.8-ish range, which is again very, very impressive, no doubt. But unfortunately for creators, you not only want, a full 100% sRGB coverage, but you also want 100% gamut saturation, and you also want low delta E levels. So this is just sort of achieving two of those three. Definitely, you're not going to be doing any color sensitive editing on this thing. Now down to the creative performance of the HP Omen 15. Now, unlike its Intel variant, the Ryzen powered one unfortunately falls short, and how? Now, this machine took over 42 minutes just to get the 500 raw file export done. And this is not just once, like I repeated that test over and over and over again, and it just would not do it any faster. Same thing with Premiere. Exporting our 5-minute and 20-minute sample video files took longer than we've seen on other machines, and that's in context with, for example, the Asus Stuff A15, which we reviewed earlier, which is also powered by the Ryzen 7 4800H. Check out that review. And also, of course, in comparison to the Zephyrus G14, which is powered by the Ryzen 9 4900HS, and even that what that managed to do was much faster. The Omen 15 with its Ryzen 7 4800H definitely is considerably slower compared to its peers, and of course also the competition. The potential reason for that is the fact that it only comes with 8 gigs of RAM. All of the systems that we've tested have had 16 GB of RAM or more. This has got 8, and as I've discussed in many videos before, RAM is one of those things that gets eaten up first when you're trying to run a creative workload. So if you want to be editing on this, this is not the machine for you. Now let's talk about the thermals on the Omen 15. Surprisingly, during our gaming sessions, the surface temperatures were absolutely cool. Like the center of the keyboard, which is generally where you feel the most heat, on this machine was barely even warm. WASD keys were cool as a cucumber, and overall the laptop was just pretty chilled out. And in fact, that was the case even when we were rendering all these heavy workloads. 500 raw files, laptop was the surface was completely cold, and all of this testing was done in a room where the ambient temperature was between 23 and 25 degrees. But here's the fun fact: looking at the CPU temperatures, we see that during the 500 raw file export, our temperature does manage to go pretty high. Like we see numbers as high as 99 degrees Celsius. Not too bad given the fact that the Ryzen 7 4800H can go up to 105 degrees safely. With Premiere, that number goes a little higher, touching about 101 degrees in certain points, but on average we see the temperature stay between 85 to 95 degrees. For the CPU during the Premiere export, and for Lightroom, that number is again between 85 to 95 degrees. Not bad actually at all, given the fact that the CPU and GPU are operating at such high temperatures, but the surface is managing to stay cool. The CPU does not throttle at any point it just does not. But the fact that there's only 8 gigs of RAM, therefore, is what is the problem. Like that's the bottleneck, unfortunately. Performance wise, let's conclude this, okay? For creators, definitely not the laptop. You are better off looking at the NV15, which is designed specifically for this, or even the Intel variant of this machine. In fact, you could even look at the Ryzen, anything. Basically, just make sure you have 16 gigs of RAM. Like gaming, you don't need that much unless you're playing Flight Simulator. That's a different beast altogether. But if you're running creative workloads, you need to have 16 gigs of RAM. If you're gaming medium to high settings, 8 gigs is more than enough. So that's about the performance of the Omen 15. Now let's talk about some other things such as the build quality. Now interestingly, the Omen 15 you would think would be identical irrespective of whether it's the Intel variant or the AMD variant, right? I thought so too. And for the most part it is. You still have that flimsy lid. And a lot of people have pointed out that it's okay, it's fine, blah blah blah. People have said who lives to live from one side, whatever. You know what, if you're happy with the flimsy lid, good for you. But there is one glaring problem with the design of this laptop. The edges on the front side are so sharp. Like, I've had a friend ask me if I was hurting myself when they looked at my wrist because of all the lines I had across just from using this machine. I actually, in fact, even have a cut from it. So, it's not, I don't know, like HP, what happened between the Intel and the AMD variants of the two machines, I'm not really sure, but this one is definitely way, way, way sharper than the Intel variant. The Intel one did not hurt, this one definitely hurts. And I tend to rest my arms on the keyboard island and on this area over here to sort of get a nice, comfortable feel for typing. So, this is definitely a problem. Like, I don't genuinely know how to solve it, just short of like maybe wrapping your wrists in like those wristbands or something, which is just silly if you think about it. But, that's one way to keep your wrists safe. Otherwise, people are going to be worried that you're hurting yourself. I still have lines, by the way, from the testing. But the build quality overall is pretty solid. Typing experience, so the keyboard, the trackpad on this, again, the keyboard is really nice, and you have this unique layout where you don't have a number pad over here, so the arrow keys get enough space, they're large. I really, really like that. And the fact that we also have dedicated print screen, home, page up, page down keys is also really nice. Like, it helps me as somebody who used this laptop to write a lot of articles as well, to scroll a lot of websites, etc. These keys come in handy, and having them be dedicated is great. There's also a dedicated key for the calculator, which I absolutely love. Like, oh my god, so cool. And then there's this dedicated key for the Omen command center, which is also pretty handy. What is a little confusing is the power button being right next to the delete key. So I've actually unfortunately shut this laptop down accidentally a few times. So what you're going to want to do is remap what the power key does, or just be very, very, very mindful of not pressing it. So that's pretty much all your options are. The trackpad on this thing works really well. Again, precision drivers, great, nothing to really write home about. But there is one flaw. This has a unified click button, so left and right click, but the bias isn't right in the center. Like, there are parts of the left click where if you press, you actually get the right click operating. So not really sure about the tuning on this thing. It could be an isolated issue with this unit, I'm not really sure, but it feels slightly askew, the entire experience. But I would just use a mouse. If you're going to be gaming, you're going to be using an external mouse anyway, so not that bad of an issue. Next, let's talk about the sound quality. That's something that people care about. So these are again Bang & Olufsen tuned speakers. HP's had that association for a while, and they're down-firing speakers. They're over here on the lower side, not on the grill on top, as rightly pointed out by some of you, and as obviously also discovered by me when I tore this machine apart. The sound is actually just about average. Like, I don't know how really to say this. Windows machines, it's been a while since I've had a laptop to test with great sound coming right out of it. The best I've experienced, and the best you will experience from any laptop, onboard speakers, is the MacBook Pro 16-inch. Got a review of that as well, you can check it out. But on this, the sound is average. You can watch a movie, you can watch a show, as long as it's a quiet one. If you're watching an action movie, if you're watching something like, let's say, Transformers, bad sound. If you're playing a game like Doom Eternal or Call of Duty Modern Warfare, you can still get away with it for a really nice, rich, wholesome experience. And to experience that sound, and to have those separate elements be heard as separate elements, you will need headphones. There's just no two ways about it. Thankfully, you have a separate headphone jack, so you won't have to worry about that either. So let's talk about storage. The storage in the Omen 15, the Ryzen edition, is a 512 GB NVMe drive. This is a WD SN730 drive, so not the Samsung ultra fast one we've seen. And as you can see over here, the read-write speeds are also pretty modest. We have 1895 Mbps on read and 1623 on write. Now, when it actually comes to real-life copying speeds, now what we're doing is we're moving about 170 gigs worth of data from our SanDisk 1TB Extreme Pro external SSD into the internal drive, which is the WD-SN730 of the Omen, and we get pretty solid write speeds of about 500 Mbps. So anywhere between 450 to 500, you see it fluctuate, and it manages to maintain that write speed for quite a large chunk of that data transfer, which is actually pretty impressive. Now, you may think that, a 1600 Mbps is not all that fast of a write speed, but in real life, I mean, imagine being able to move 170 gigs of data in under 5 minutes. Can you try doing that when you had a hard drive in your system? You wouldn't even think of it. It'd probably take all night to do it. But on the Omen, it happens super fast. So let's conclude this review. Let's do a TLDR. Gaming performance on this thing, impressive. You hit the 60 FPS mark for most games, and that's pretty much all you want. The laptop remains absolutely cool under pressure. That's at least on the surface. CPU, GPU do get hot, yes, but they do not throttle at any point. Unless, of course, you're blocking the vents and you're being silly if you try to make it throttle, it'll throttle. But under normal and sane operating conditions, it's not gonna throttle. The keyboard to type on is great. It's a chiclet style keyboard. It's a nice experience, but the edge on the front edge of the laptop is extremely sharp and is definitely hurtful. Like, it'll hurt your hands, and it sort of hurts my feelings that this is even happening, but it is what it is. The trackpad is fairly good. It works. Left and right key could be an issue for some of you. It was for me. And all in all, it's just a nice laptop that's designed specifically for gaming. It's not for content creators by any means. So if that's what you're looking for, you're better off looking at the NV series or other laptops from other brands. But if you want an entry-level gaming laptop, the Omen 15 powered by the Ryzen 7 4800H, a decent consideration, but only for gaming. So that's about it. If you've got any suggestions, any comments, if you have any questions, in fact, leave them all in the comment section below, and I'm going to try and get back to you as soon as I can. And as for me, I'm going to go ahead and prepare for my next review. Thank you guys for watching.